A couple set off on their anniversary hunting trip into the Michigan wilderness. But they never returned, vanishing without a trace into the vast forest. Then, 2 years later, their dog suddenly shows up on the porch, injured, emaciated, and carrying a secret that would trigger a chain of events exposing an unthinkable nightmare. Elizabeth Spence pushed herself up from her knees, wincing as her arthritic joints protested the movement. The Michigan sun beat down on her weathered hands as she pulled another weed from around her tomato plants. At 72, the garden work seemed to get harder each year, but she'd be damned if she'd let the weeds take over. Not after all the work she'd put into this patch of earth over the decades. Just a few more, she muttered to herself, eyeing the row of vegetables that still needed attention. But the timer she'd set in the kitchen began its insistent beeping, reminding her of the pot roast simmering on the stove. With a grunt of effort, she leveraged herself to her feet, one hand pressed against her lower back. The walk to the house seemed longer than it used to. Each step up the wooden porch stairs sent a twinge through her knees. She'd been putting off this garden work for weeks, but with Niels busy at his job and Dean, she stopped that thought before it could fully form. 2 years. 2 years since Dean and his wife Jocelyn had gone hunting and never come back. Elizabeth reached for the screen door handle, already thinking about the carrots she needed to add to the roast, when movement on the porch caught her eye. She turned, expecting maybe a raccoon or stray cat. The trowel clattered from her nerveless fingers. There, lying on the worn wooden boards of her porch, was a dog. But not just any dog. Even through the matted, filthy fur and the shocking thinness of his body, she recognized him instantly. Rufus, Dean's Irish wolfhound. Elizabeth stumbled backward, her hand flying to her chest where her heart had begun a wild, painful rhythm. "No," she whispered, blinking hard. "No, it can't be." The dog lifted his head weakly at the sound of her voice. One of his front legs was wrapped in what looked like a makeshift bandage, stained and filthy. His ribs showed starkly through his coat, and there was a raw, infected wound on his forehead. But those eyes, those gentle brown eyes that had always looked at Dean with such devotion, they were unmistakably Rufus's. "Oh, my God!" Elizabeth gasped, her legs threatening to give out. She gripped the porch railing, unable to look away from the impossible sight before her. 2 years. The dog had been missing for 2 years, along with Dean and Jocelyn. The search parties had found nothing. No bodies, no gear, no trace of them, or Rufus, in those vast Michigan woods. With shaking hands, she fumbled for her phone in her pocket, nearly dropping it twice before managing to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? "This is Elizabeth Spence," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I need officers at my house immediately. My son's dog just showed up. My son who's been missing for 2 years. "Ma'am, can you repeat that?" "Dean Spence's dog," she said more firmly, though her voice still shook. "My son is DEA agent Dean Spence. He went missing 2 years ago with his wife Jocelyn while hunting. Their dog just appeared on my porch. He's injured badly. Please, send someone now." "Units are on their way, Mrs. Spence. Are you safe? Is anyone else there?" "Just me and the dog. He can barely move." "Oh, God, what does this mean? Where's my son?" "Stay on the line with me, ma'am. Officers will be there shortly." Elizabeth sank down onto the porch steps, keeping her eyes on Rufus. The dog's tail gave a weak thump against the boards, as if he recognized her too. She wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. All she could do was stare and whisper, "Where's Dean, boy? Where's my son?" The wail of sirens grew louder, and within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled into her driveway. Officers Morrison and Bradley. She recognized them both. They'd been part of the initial search when Dean disappeared. "Mrs. Spence," Officer Morrison said gently, approaching slowly. His eyes widened when he saw the dog. "Jesus, is that really?" "It's Rufus," Elizabeth confirmed, tears streaming down her face now. It's Dean's dog. Officer Bradley was already on his radio, calling for additional units and a veterinarian. Morrison knelt beside the dog, careful not to startle him. "Hey there, boy. You've had a rough time, haven't you?" He looked up at Elizabeth. "We need to get him medical attention immediately, and we'll need to take you to the station, Mrs. Spence. The detectives will want to speak with you right away." "But what about searching? If Rufus is alive, maybe Dean—" "We'll handle everything," Morrison assured her. "Let's focus on getting you and the dog somewhere safe first." More vehicles arrived. An animal control van with a veterinarian, 2 more patrol cars, and an unmarked detective's vehicle. Elizabeth watched in a daze as the vet, a young woman with gentle hands, carefully examined Rufus where he lay. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration," the vet murmured. "This wound on his head is infected. The leg, someone tried to bandage this, but it's been a while. We need to get him to the clinic immediately." They loaded Rufus onto a special stretcher, the dog whimpering softly, but too weak to resist. Elizabeth found herself in the back of Officer Morrison's patrol car, heading to the station. Her mind raced with questions. How had Rufus survived 2 years in the wilderness? Who had bandaged his leg? And most importantly, what had happened to Dean and Jocelyn? The familiar building of the police station came into view, but it felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. Officers held doors for her, guided her to a comfortable interview room, not the stark interrogation rooms she'd seen on TV, but a softer space with padded chairs and a coffee maker in the corner. "Mrs. Spence, I'm Detective Walsh," a woman in her 40s introduced herself. "I know this must be overwhelming. Can I get you some water? Coffee?" "Where's the dog?" Elizabeth asked. "I need to know he's being taken care of." Dr. Hernandez from the Emergency Veterinary Clinic is with him now. She'll update us as soon as she can. Right now, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. More people filed in. Detectives she recognized from Dean's department at the DEA, uniformed officers who'd known her son. The small room grew crowded with concerned faces. Elizabeth recounted finding Rufus, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. The detectives took notes, asked careful questions. When did she last see the dog before today? What was his condition then? Had she noticed anything unusual around her property recently? "The bandage on his leg," Detective Walsh said thoughtfully. "That's not something a dog could do to himself. Someone helped him." "Then someone's seen him," Elizabeth said urgently. "Someone knows something." "We're already mobilizing search teams," another detective assured her. "We'll start from your property and work outward, follow any trail the dog might have left." Dr. Hernandez arrived then, still in her scrubs. "He's stable," she announced, and Elizabeth sagged with relief. "Sedated for now while we treat his wounds and run some tests. He's been through hell, sorry for the language, but he's a fighter. Someone definitely provided medical care at some point, though not recently. That bandage is at least a few weeks old." "When can I see him?" Elizabeth asked. "Let's give him a few hours to rest. I'll bring him to you as soon as he's ready." The vet paused. "Mrs. Spence, that's one tough dog. Whatever happened out there, he fought to make it back." Elizabeth nodded, fresh tears spilling over. Rufus had made it back. But where was her son? The interview room at the station had grown warm with so many bodies packed inside. Elizabeth sat at the center of it all, fielding questions from the growing group of officers and detectives. Word had spread quickly through the department. Dean Spence's dog had returned after 2 years. "Mrs. Spence, think carefully," Detective Walsh pressed gently. "In the days before Dean and Jocelyn went hunting, did he mention anything unusual? Any concerns about his work, threats he'd received?" Elizabeth shook her head slowly. "Nothing." He was excited about the trip. They'd been planning it for months, their anniversary hunting trip. He said the woods up north were perfect this time of year for deer. The door opened and 3 more officers entered, including Lieutenant Marcus Hayes from the DEA. Elizabeth recognized him from department functions she'd attended with Dean. "Elizabeth," Hayes said, his face grave, "I'm sorry you're going through this. We're going to do everything we can to find answers." He turned to the others. "I've got our tech team pulling all of Dean's case files from the 2 months before he disappeared. If someone targeted him, there might be a connection." Another officer, one Elizabeth didn't recognize, stepped forward. He was younger, maybe mid-30s, with sharp blue eyes and close-cropped sandy hair. "Mrs. Spence, I'm Officer Dmitry Volkov. I worked a few joint operations with Dean. He's a good man." The conversation continued, theories flying back and forth. Elizabeth's head began to pound. She'd been at the station for over 3 hours now, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the initial shock was wearing off. Her arthritis was flaring badly, joints stiffening from sitting in the same position. "I think Mrs. Spence has had enough for now," Officer Volkov said suddenly, noticing her discomfort. "Perhaps someone should take her home. She needs rest, and we need to coordinate the search teams anyway." Detective Walsh nodded. "He's right. Elizabeth, we'll continue working here. Is there someone we can call to stay with you?" "My other son, Niels, but he's at work in Detroit. It'll take him a few hours to get here." "I can drive you home," Officer Volkov offered. "Make sure you're settled safely. This has been a tremendous shock." Elizabeth accepted gratefully. Her own car was still at home, and she wasn't sure she could manage the drive anyway, with her hands shaking as they were. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Hernandez called with an update. "Rufus is stable, but still sedated. I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Make sure there are no complications from the treatment. Would it be all right if I brought him to your home this evening? I'd like to check his response when he wakes up fully, see how he does in familiar surroundings." "Yes, please," Elizabeth said immediately. He should be home. The drive back to her house felt surreal. Officer Volkov kept up a gentle stream of conversation, asking about her garden, her years in the community. He seemed genuinely kind, helping her from the car when they arrived, making sure she had her keys. "The search teams will be working through the night," he assured her as they walked to her door. "Every available officer is being called in. We'll find answers, Mrs. Spence." Inside, Elizabeth sank into her favorite armchair, the one where she used to sit and watch Dean and Niels play as boys. Officer Volkov checked the windows, the back door, making sure everything was secure. "Would you like me to wait until your son arrives?" he offered. "No, you've been very kind. I'll be fine." She paused. "Officer Volkov, do you really think... Could Dean still be alive?" Something flickered across his face. Concern? Sympathy? It was gone before she could identify it. If anyone could survive out there, it would be Dean. He knew those woods better than most. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted them. Elizabeth looked out to see Niels's pickup truck pulling in at speed, gravel spraying. Her younger son was out of the vehicle before it had fully stopped, rushing toward the house. "Mom!" Niels burst through the door, immediately wrapping her in a careful hug. At 38, he was the opposite of his older brother in many ways. Where Dean was calculated and methodical, Niels was impulsive and emotional. "I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. Traffic was a nightmare, and my boss was being a complete—" He noticed Officer Volkov and stopped. "Sorry, I'm Niels Spence." "Officer Dmitry Volkov." They shook hands. "I was just making sure your mother got home safely." "Is it true? Rufus really came back." "He's at the vet clinic," Elizabeth explained. "Dr. Hernandez will bring him home soon. He's in bad shape, but alive." Niels ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that Elizabeth's heart clenched. "Jesus, 2 years? How is that even possible?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Officer Volkov said. "I should get back to the station, help coordinate the search efforts." He turned to Elizabeth. "You have my card. Call if you need anything or remember any details that might help." "Thank you for driving me home," Elizabeth said. "You've been very kind." Volkov was just stepping off the porch when another vehicle turned into the driveway, a van with emergency veterinary services emblazoned on the side. Dr. Hernandez was behind the wheel. "Perfect timing," the vet called out, climbing from the van. "He's starting to wake up. I'll need help getting him inside." Officer Volkov immediately turned back. "I'll help." They opened the van's rear doors to reveal Rufus on a special cushioned stretcher. The dog's eyes were open, but still glazed from sedation. His head lifted slightly at the sound of voices. "Easy, boy," Dr. Hernandez soothed. "Let's get you—" The transformation was instantaneous. The moment Rufus's gaze landed on Officer Volkov, the dog exploded into motion. Despite his weakened state and the sedation still in his system, he lunged upward, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. His lips pulled back, showing teeth, and he barked with a ferocity that made everyone step back. "Whoa!" Niels exclaimed, moving protectively in front of his mother. Rufus continued to bark and snarl, his entire focus on Officer Volkov, who had taken several steps backward, hands raised. "It's okay," Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed he'd gone pale. "I probably smell like my K9 unit. Duke was in my patrol car all morning. Dogs can be territorial about that." But Rufus wasn't backing down. Despite Dr. Hernandez's attempts to calm him, he continued to growl, hackles raised, eyes never leaving the officer. "Maybe you should go," Niels suggested. "We can handle it from here." Volkov nodded, attempting a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, probably best. Duke's a German shepherd, very different energy from a wolfhound. Rufus probably thinks I'm bringing competition into his territory." He backed toward his patrol car. I'll check in tomorrow. Make sure everything's okay." Only after the patrol car had pulled away did Rufus begin to calm, though he kept looking toward the road, a low rumble still in his throat. "That was strange," Dr. Hernandez mused. "In my experience, dogs don't usually react that strongly to just a scent, especially not in Rufus's condition." "Well, let's get him inside," the vet said. "He needs rest, and I want to monitor him for a few more hours. Mrs. Spence, do you still have his bed? Familiar items will help." "Everything's just as they left it," Elizabeth said softly. "I couldn't bear to change anything." As they carefully carried Rufus into the house, Elizabeth couldn't shake the image of the dog's reaction to Officer Volkov. In all the years Rufus had been part of their family, she'd never seen him act that aggressive toward anyone. Dr. Hernandez had left an hour ago, satisfied that Rufus was stable enough to remain in Elizabeth's care. The dog now lay on his old bed in the corner of the living room, the same spot where he'd always kept watch when Dean and Jocelyn visited. His breathing was steady but labored, ribs visible with each rise and fall of his chest. Niels sat across from his mother at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. The familiar ritual of sharing coffee felt strange under these circumstances. The same table where they'd gathered for countless family meals, now heavy with unspoken fears. "He loved that dog more than anything," Niels said quietly, watching Rufus sleep. "Remember when he first brought him home? Jocelyn was so mad. You didn't tell me he'd be the size of a small horse." Elizabeth managed a weak smile. But she fell in love with him just as fast, used to sneak him treats when she thought Dean wasn't looking. "Dean always knew," Niels added. "He'd pretend he didn't see." They lapsed into silence. Elizabeth's arthritis was acting up worse than usual, stress making her joints feel like they were full of ground glass. She rubbed her swollen knuckles absently. "Mom, that reaction to the officer earlier—" Niels started. "I know. It was strange. Dean always said Rufus could read people better than any person could. Remember that time with the contractor who tried to overcharge them for the deck repair? Rufus wouldn't let the guy in the house. And Dean was right not to trust him, Elizabeth recalled. Found out later he'd been scamming elderly homeowners all over the county." The phone rang, startling them both. Elizabeth's heart jumped. Every call now carried the weight of possibility. She answered with trembling fingers. "Mrs. Spence, this is Detective Walsh. I wanted to give you an update on our search efforts." "Yes?" Elizabeth put the phone on speaker so Niels could hear. "We've had teams in the forest since this afternoon. We were able to locate what we believe are Rufus's tracks, leading from the deeper woods toward populated areas. The K-9 units followed the trail for several miles." "And?" Niels leaned forward. Walsh's voice was carefully neutral. "The trail is old, Mrs. Spence. Days, maybe weeks. It seems to meander significantly, the pattern you'd expect from an animal foraging, hunting, surviving on its own. We lost it at several stream crossings." "But someone bandaged his leg," Elizabeth protested. "Someone helped him." "Yes, that's unusual. We're exploring the possibility that maybe a hunter or hiker came across him at some point and provided basic first aid. But honestly, Mrs. Spence, that bandage is crude. It could have been there for quite some time. In this wilderness, it's not uncommon for people to help injured animals they come across without reporting it." "What are you saying?" Nils's voice had an edge to it. Detective Walsh sighed audibly. "Based on what we're seeing, the dog's condition, the meandering trail, the time frame, our working theory is that Rufus has been surviving in the wilderness for the past 2 years. Dogs are remarkably adaptable, especially a breed as hardy as an Irish wolfhound. He would have been able to hunt small game, find water sources." "You think my son is dead?" Elizabeth's words were flat, not a question. "Mrs. Spence, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but 2 years in those woods with no confirmed sightings, no evidence of camps or shelters beyond what we found in the initial searches. The most likely scenario is that Dean and Jocelyn encountered some kind of accident, a fall, perhaps, or wildlife. The dog survived because he's a dog. They're built for survival in ways humans aren't." "That's bullshit," Niels snapped. "My brother was DEA. He was trained for survival situations. He knew those woods like the back of his hand." "I understand your frustration." "No, you don't. You're writing them off based on a few hours of searching and some dog tracks." "Mr. Spence, we're not writing anyone off. The search will continue. We'll have teams out there for days, maybe weeks. We'll search every cave, every ravine, every possible shelter. But I wanted to be honest with you about what we're finding so far." Elizabeth closed her eyes. "Thank you for the update, Detective. We'll call immediately if anything changes. Try to get some rest." After she hung up, Niels slammed his fist on the table. "They're giving up already, just like 2 years ago." "They searched for months back then," Elizabeth reminded him gently. "Not good enough. Dean wouldn't just die out there. And even if something happened, there would be evidence. Bodies don't just disappear." "Animals—" Elizabeth couldn't finish the sentence. "No." Niels stood abruptly. "I don't accept that. Look at Rufus. He made it back. He found his way home after 2 years. That dog wouldn't leave Dean unless—" He paused, his anger deflating slightly. "Unless he had no choice." They both looked at the sleeping dog. Even in rest, Rufus's face showed signs of his ordeal. Scars that hadn't been there before, a chunk missing from one ear, that terrible wound on his head still raw, despite the vet's treatment. "What happened out there, boy?" Elizabeth whispered. "Where's my son?" Rufus's eyes opened slightly at the sound of her voice, tail giving a single weak thump before he drifted back to sleep. "The bandage means someone helped him," Niels said firmly. "Someone, somewhere, knows something. The police just need to look harder." "Accidents happen, Niels. Even to experienced people. Remember that park ranger last year who—" "Don't?" Niels spun to face her. "Don't compare Dean to some random hiker. He knew those woods better than anyone. He'd been hunting there since he was 12, and he'd never ever put Jocelyn in danger." "I know that." "Do you? Because you're sitting there listening to that detective's theories like they mean something. Like Dean and Jocelyn just, what, fell off a cliff? Got eaten by bears? With no trace?" Elizabeth flinched at the harsh images. The search teams gave up after 3 months, just like they're giving up now. Niels ran his hands through his hair in frustration. They see Rufus and think, oh, the dog survived in the wild for 2 years. The humans must be dead. But what about the bandage, Mom? What about the fact that Rufus made it home at all? He wouldn't leave Dean unless something forced him to. Or unless Dean told him to, Elizabeth said quietly. That stopped Niels mid-pace. They both looked at Rufus, still sleeping fitfully on his bed. You think Dean sent him for help? Niels's voice had dropped. I don't know what to think anymore. Elizabeth's shoulders sagged. I want to believe they're alive. God knows I do. But 2 years, Niels. No ransom demands, no bodies, no camps, no signs. Maybe the police are right. Maybe something terrible happened and Rufus was the only survivor. No. Niels's jaw set in a way that reminded Elizabeth painfully of his father. I'm not accepting that. Not without proof. He strode toward the hallway leading to the garage. Elizabeth heard him rummaging around, metal clanking against metal. What are you doing? Niels emerged carrying his hunting rifle and Dean's old camping pack. What I should have done better 2 years ago. I'm going back out there. Niels, it's getting dark. No, I've got lights and camping gear. He was already checking the rifle, loading ammunition into his pockets. I searched for weeks after they disappeared, but maybe I missed something. Maybe things have changed. If Rufus found his way back now, after all this time, something made that happen. The police are searching. The police are going through the motions. They've already decided Dean and Jocelyn are dead. He pulled out a tent, sleeping bag, water purification tablets. I haven't. Elizabeth stood, her arthritic knees protesting. At least wait until morning. Go with the search teams. So they can tell me where I can and can't look? No thanks. He found Dean's GPS unit, checked the batteries. I'll start where they went missing and work outward. Different patterns than last time. If someone helped Rufus, there might be cabins or camps we missed. Niels, please, I can't lose you too. He paused then, seeing the fear in his mother's eyes. His expression softened slightly. You won't. I'll check in by satellite phone every 12 hours. But I have to do this, Mom. I can't just sit here while they write Dean off. Elizabeth knew that determined look. She'd seen it in his father, in Dean, and now in Niels. There would be no talking him out of this. Be careful, she whispered. I will. He hugged her briefly, then headed for the door. Take care of Rufus. Maybe when he's stronger, he'll be able to show us something. The police said the trail went cold. The police followed one trail. Rufus might have taken different routes over 2 years. There could be other signs. He shouldered the pack, rifle in hand. I'll find something, Mom. Whatever happened out there, I'll find the truth. Elizabeth watched from the doorway as Niels loaded his truck, every movement sharp with purpose. She wanted to stop him, to keep her remaining son safe, but she understood his need to act. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. As the truck's taillights disappeared into the gathering darkness, Elizabeth closed the door and returned to Rufus's side. The dog's eyes were open now, watching her with an ancient sadness. He's going to look for them, she told the dog unnecessarily. Just like you did, I suppose. Rufus whined softly, his gaze moving to the door as if he too was watching Niels leave. Elizabeth settled into her chair, one hand resting on the dog's head. Whatever secrets those woods held, she prayed they would finally give them up. The house felt too quiet with Niels gone. Elizabeth sat in her armchair beside Rufus's bed, the only sounds the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the dog's labored breathing. It was past 10 o'clock now, the window's dark mirrors reflecting the warm lamplight of the living room. Do you remember? All those Sunday dinners, you under the table hoping for scraps? Joseline always snuck you pieces of roast when she thought I wasn't looking. Her voice caught. I miss them so much. I keep wondering, will I ever see my boy again? Will he walk through that door like you did? She knew she was being maudlin, talking to a dog about her fears, but who else was there? Niels was out in those dark woods, chasing shadows and hope. Her arthritis was too bad tonight to call her sister in Florida. Holding the phone that long would be agony. So she sat with Rufus, 2 survivors keeping vigil together. The police think they're gone, she whispered. They think you lived wild all this time, that Dean and Joseline had an accident. But you wouldn't leave him, would you? Not unless you had to. Not unless he told you to go. A sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Elizabeth's heart leaped. Niels must have changed his mind, decided to wait until morning after all. She pushed herself up from the chair, joints protesting, and shuffled to the front door. Through the peephole, she was surprised to see Officer Volkov standing on her porch, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. He was holding what looked like a manila folder. Elizabeth opened the door part way. Officer Volkov? It's rather late. I apologize, Mrs. Spence, he said, and he did look genuinely apologetic. I know it's after 10, but I've been going through old case files at the station, cross-referencing some of Dean's DEA work with missing persons reports from the last few years. I think I might have found something. A lead? Possibly. There are some connections I'd like to show you, get your input on. I was going to wait until morning, but I saw your lights were still on, and I thought you'd want to know immediately if there was any new information. Of course, yes, come in. The moment she began opening the door wider, Rufus exploded into a frenzy of barking. Despite his weakened state, he struggled to his feet, lips pulled back in a snarl, his focus laser-sharp on Officer Volkov. Rufus! No exclamation mark. Elizabeth turned back to the dog, shocked by the intensity of his reaction. Stop that! But Rufus continued his aggressive display, actually trying to lunge forward despite his injuries. His barking was so loud it hurt Elizabeth's ears. I'm so sorry, she said to Volkov, who had taken a step back from the doorway. I don't know what's gotten into him. Ever since he came back, he's been acting so strange. It's all right, Volkov said, though Elizabeth noticed he kept his hand near his service weapon. Trauma can change an animal's behavior significantly. Let me put him in his crate. Just give me a moment. It took considerable effort to get Rufus into the large wire crate they kept in the corner of the living room. He fought her the whole way, something he'd never done before, and continued barking even after she'd latched the door. Hush now, she said firmly. That's enough. Officer Volkov is trying to help us. She returned to the front door, embarrassed and flustered. I'm so sorry about that. Please, come in. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. That would be wonderful, thank you. Volkov stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the living room. It must be difficult being here alone with everything that's happened. Niels was here earlier, but he's gone to search the woods himself. Couldn't wait for morning. Elizabeth led the way toward the kitchen, noting that Rufus's barking had shifted to a low, continuous growl. He's convinced the police aren't doing enough. Family often feels that way, Volkov said, following her. It's natural to want to take action, to feel like you're doing something. Yes, I suppose so. Now, you said you found some connections in old files? I did. Some very interesting patterns that might explain. Elizabeth had just turned to ask him to have a seat at the kitchen table when she felt something soft press against her face. The sharp chemical smell hit her nostrils a split second before she understood what was happening. A cloth over her mouth and nose. Chloroform her mind supplied uselessly as she tried to struggle, but Volkov was stronger, younger, and had the element of surprise. One arm wrapped around her waist, holding her against him, while the other kept the cloth firmly in place. Elizabeth's arthritic hands clawed weakly at his arm, but already the edges of her vision were going dark. "I'm sorry about this," she heard him say, his voice sounding very far away. "But your son made this necessary." Her legs gave out. The kitchen tilted sideways. Through the growing darkness, she could hear Rufus going absolutely wild in his crate, barking and snarling and throwing himself against the wire walls. "He tried to warn me," she thought muzzily. "He knew. He tried to tell me." The last thing she heard before the darkness claimed her completely was Rufus's desperate barking and the sound of her body hitting the kitchen floor. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it a pounding headache and the taste of chemicals in her mouth. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered open to harsh fluorescent lighting and concrete. She was sitting on a cold floor, her back against something hard. When she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her. "Ah, you're awake?" Officer Volkov stood a few feet away, no longer the helpful, concerned officer from before. His uniform was gone, replaced by dark civilian clothes. The friendly mask had dropped entirely, revealing cold calculation in those blue eyes. "Why?" Elizabeth's voice came out as a croak. "Why are you doing this?" "Because your son couldn't leave well enough alone," Volkov replied matter-of-factly. "He had to play hero, had to send that damn dog for help." Elizabeth's mind struggled to process this. "You mean Dean is alive?" "For now." Volkov pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. Though that may change depending on how cooperative everyone decides to be. Two men entered through a metal door Elizabeth hadn't noticed. They were large, rough-looking, with the kind of faces that had seen violence and hadn't minded it. They spoke rapidly to Volkov in what Elizabeth recognized as Russian, though she couldn't understand the words. Their tone was angry, aggressive. Volkov responded in the same language, gesturing toward Elizabeth. One of the men spat on the floor and said something that sounded like a curse. "Get her up," Volkov said in English. "Time for a family reunion." The two men hauled Elizabeth to her feet, ignoring her gasp of pain as her arthritic joints protested. Her shoulders screamed as they half-dragged her through the warehouse. She tried to take in details. Metal shelving, shipping containers, the smell of motor oil and rust. They were somewhere industrial, but she had no idea where. They passed through another door into a connected warehouse space. This one was darker, with only a few overhead bulbs providing dim illumination. Volkov led them to what looked like a storage room that had been walled off with plywood, creating a crude cell. He produced a key and unlocked a padlock on the door. "Your son has been our guest for quite some time, Mrs. Spence. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you." The door swung open, and Elizabeth's knees nearly buckled. There, in the corner of the small room, was a figure that barely resembled her son. Dean was skeletal, his once strong frame reduced to skin stretched over bones. His hair was long and matted, his beard unkempt. He was secured to a support pole with heavy chains lying on a filthy mattress. His clothes, if they could still be called that, were rags. But it was his eyes that broke her heart. Those familiar brown eyes, so like his father's, now hollow and haunted. One of the criminals walked over and kicked the pole hard, the metallic clang echoing through the space. Dean jerked awake, instinctively trying to curl into himself before he saw who stood before him. "Mom?" His voice was barely a whisper, disbelief and horror warring on his gaunt face. "Number no, no, no." "Dean!" Elizabeth tried to move toward him, but the men held her back. "You see what happens when you make foolish decisions?" one of the criminals said in heavily accented English. "You send dog for help, now your mother pays price too." Dean struggled against his chains, what little strength he had left going into the futile effort. "Please, don't hurt her. She has nothing to do with this. I'll tell you whatever you want, give you whatever information." "You already gave us everything useful," Volkov interrupted. "Your mother is here because you couldn't just accept your situation. You had to try to be clever, sending that mutt away." "Please," Dean's voice broke. "She's 72 years old. She has arthritis. She needs medication. You can't—" "We can do whatever we want," the second criminal said. "You should have thought of consequences before—" Elizabeth finally found her voice. "Dean, where's Jocelyn?" The look that crossed her son's face told her everything. His eyes filled with tears, and he shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, Mom," Dean whispered. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "Touching," Volkov said dryly. "But we don't have time for reunions. Come." They dragged Elizabeth back out of the room, Dean's desperate pleas following them. "Mom! Mom, I'm sorry! Don't hurt her! Please!" The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The criminals spoke again in Russian, gesturing and appearing to argue about something. Finally, Volkov nodded and turned to Elizabeth. "You'll be kept separately. Can't have you two plotting together." They took her to another part of the warehouse, to a shipping container that had been modified into another makeshift cell. Inside was nothing but a pole fixed to the floor. Volkov produced zip ties and secured her to it, the position immediately sending fire through her arthritic joints. "Please," Elizabeth gasped. "I need something to sit on properly. A mattress, a cushion, anything. My arthritis—" "Not my problem," Volkov said coldly. "Your son shouldn't have sent the dog for help if he cared about your comfort." "How long?" Elizabeth managed. "How long have you had him?" Volkov paused at the container door. 2 years, give or take. Your son has been very useful to our operations. DEA, intelligence, is quite valuable in certain circles." "You forced him to give you information?" "Forced is such an ugly word. Let's say we provided proper motivation, first with his wife, then with the dog. He was much more cooperative after we showed him what happens to those who resist." The implications hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. Jocelyn was dead. They'd tortured Dean for 2 years, used his loved ones against him. "You're a police officer," she said, though it sounded foolish even to her. "I'm a businessman," Volkov corrected. "Being a police officer just provides excellent cover and access. Now, I have things to attend to. Try to get comfortable, Mrs. Spence. You'll be here for a while." Officer Volkov had his hand on the container door when he froze. The sound was unmistakable, multiple vehicles approaching fast, tires crunching on gravel. His hand flew to the radio on his belt. He spoke rapidly in Russian, his voice tight with urgency. The response that crackled back was panicked, the voice on the other end shouting. Even without understanding the language, Elizabeth could hear the fear. Through the thin walls of the container, she heard car doors slamming, many of them. Then a voice she recognized, Detective Walsh, on a megaphone. "This is the police. We have the building surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Volkov spun back to Elizabeth, his face twisted with rage. He pulled out his service weapon, a Glock that looked impossibly large and black in the dim light. "Your son brought this on you," he snarled, rushing back to her. "All of this is his fault." He grabbed the zip ties holding her to the pole, cutting them roughly with a knife. Elizabeth cried out as her arthritic wrists, held in one position too long, screamed in protest. But Volkov didn't care. He hauled her to her feet, spun her around, and pressed the gun to her temple. "Move," he ordered, using her as a shield as he pushed her toward the container door. Outside the container, the warehouse had erupted into chaos. Elizabeth could hear the Russians shouting to each other, the scrape of crates being pushed into defensive positions. Someone was yelling orders in accented English. Volkov dragged her through the warehouse, keeping her body between him and the main entrance. Elizabeth's legs shook, her joints on fire, but the gun at her head kept her moving. "This is your last warning," Detective Walsh's voice boomed through the megaphone. "Release any hostages and surrender peacefully." The response was a burst of automatic weapons fire from somewhere near the main entrance. The warehouse erupted. Elizabeth heard glass shattering, bullets punching through the metal walls with sharp pinging sounds. "SWAT is breaching!" someone shouted. An explosion, a flashbang grenade. Elizabeth's ears rang. More gunfire, the sharp crack of police weapons mixing with the deeper chatter of automatic rifles. Volkov cursed and pushed her faster, trying to navigate through the maze of containers and shelving. They were passing under a wooden support beam when a stray bullet struck it, showering them both with splinters. Volkov instinctively ducked, his grip on Elizabeth loosening for just a moment. It was enough. Elizabeth wrenched herself sideways, her body protesting but adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she still had. She stumbled, fell, and rolled behind a forklift. "Damn it!" Volkov shouted. He looked between her and his escape route, made a split-second decision, and ran. Elizabeth lay gasping behind the forklift, splinters in her hair, her whole body shaking. The gunfire was intensifying. She could hear officers shouting, "Move, move, move!" and "Contact left!" Dean, she had to get to Dean. Fighting through the pain, she began crawling across the concrete floor. Her knees screamed, her hands were bleeding from the rough surface, but she kept going. The plywood-walled cell wasn't far. She could see it through the chaos, that makeshift corner room where her son was chained. More gunfire erupted near what sounded like a back entrance. Someone was screaming in Russian. Glass crashed. A flashbang went off somewhere to her right, the concussion making her ears ring worse. She reached the corner, crawled around it. The padlock was still off from when they'd brought her to see Dean. She pushed the door open. Dean was there, trying to sit up on his filthy mattress, chains clanking. His hollow eyes widened when he saw her. "Mom, get down," he whispered urgently. "Get behind something solid." Elizabeth crawled to him, staying low. More gunfire erupted, closer now. She could hear the SWAT team's tactical commands. "Drop your weapons! Hands behind your back!" The commands were in English now, directed at someone nearby. Russian voices yelled back defiantly. 3 quick gunshots, the controlled fire of trained police officers. Then 2 more. Someone started screaming in Russian, the sound full of pain and fear. Another shot cut it short. Then, suddenly, silence, the kind that rings in your ears after chaos. Elizabeth reached Dean, her arthritic joints burning from the crawl across concrete. He stretched his skeletal arms toward her as far as the chains would allow. "I'm sorry, Mom. This is my fault. They took you because I—" "Shh," Elizabeth said, taking his face in her hands, feeling the sharp bones under papery skin. "None of this is your fault." Footsteps approached fast, multiple sets, tactical boots on concrete. "Police! Anyone in here?" The voice was American, professional, but urgent. "Here!" Elizabeth called out, her voice cracking. "We're here! We need help!" Multiple officers rushed in, weapons drawn but pointed low. They swept the room professionally, checking corners. And then, behind them, "Mom!" Niels pushed past the officers, his hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. "Mom! Oh, God!" He stopped short when he saw Dean clearly for the first time. His brother, the strong DEA agent who'd taught him to hunt, who'd always been larger than life, reduced to this skeletal figure chained like an animal. "Jesus Christ," Niels breathed. "Dean?" "It's safe now," the lead SWAT officer said, already on his radio. "Suspects are down or in custody. We need bolt cutters in here." Another officer was shouting, "We need medics in here now." "We have victims, one in critical condition." Niels dropped to his knees beside his brother, his face a mask of shock and rage. Dean managed a ghost of his old smile. "Hey, little brother, you look good." "Don't joke, man," Niels' voice cracked. "Not now, not after—" He couldn't finish. Paramedics rushed in with their equipment and a stretcher. They went to work immediately, checking Dean's vitals, starting an IV. One of them produced bolt cutters and began working on the chains. As they freed him from the pole, Dean gripped Elizabeth's hand with what little strength he had. His eyes filled with tears. "They killed Jocelyn, Mom, 14 months ago." His voice broke. "She tried to escape and they shot her, made me watch. Said it was my fault for not cooperating fast enough. Elizabeth held his hand tighter, her own tears flowing freely. Niels made a sound like a wounded animal. "We've got to move him," one of the paramedics said. "He needs immediate medical attention." They carefully, so carefully, lifted Dean onto the stretcher. He weighed almost nothing. Elizabeth struggled to her feet, Niels immediately there to support her. Together, they followed the stretcher out of that hellish room. The warehouse was a war zone. Bullet holes pocked the walls. Spent shell casings littered the floor. SWAT officers were everywhere, some still clearing rooms, others standing guard over suspects. They emerged into the night air. When had it become night? How long had she been in that container? And Elizabeth gasped at the scene. Police vehicles everywhere, their lights painting everything in reds and blues. Ambulances waiting. 3 Russians were on their knees, hands zip-tied behind their backs, officers standing guard. 2 bodies lay under white sheets, blood seeping through. And there, in the back of a patrol car, sat Officer Dmitry Volkov. His face was bloodied. He'd been tackled during his escape attempt, Elizabeth would later learn. He stared straight ahead, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Ma'am, we need to check you out too," a paramedic said, approaching Elizabeth. But she couldn't look away from Dean as they loaded him into the ambulance. 2 years. Her son had been held in that warehouse for 2 years, just miles from home. The nightmares were over, but the healing had just begun. Elizabeth stood at the glass window of the ICU, her palm pressed against the cool surface. She still couldn't reconcile the skeletal figure in the hospital bed with her son. Dean had always been strong, solid, 6 feet of trained muscle and confidence. The thing lying in that bed looked like a concentration camp survivor. "Mrs. Spence?" Dr. Kumar approached, his expression grave. "I wanted to update you on your son's condition." Niels joined them, his arm around his mother's shoulders. They'd both been checked and released. Elizabeth's injuries were minor, though her arthritis was flaring terribly from the stress and abuse. "He's severely malnourished," Dr. Kumar began, consulting his tablet. "His body weight is approximately 60% of what it should be. We're seeing signs of refeeding syndrome, so we have to be very careful with nutrition. Severe dehydration has damaged his kidneys. We're monitoring that closely." "Will he?" Elizabeth couldn't finish. "Yes, but we're seeing infected wounds, particularly on his wrists and ankles from the chains. Muscle atrophy is severe. Even if he recovers, he'll need months of physical therapy to walk properly again." Elizabeth's joints screamed as she shifted position, but she ignored them. Her pain was nothing compared to what Dean had endured. "There are some people here who need to speak with him," Dr. Kumar added reluctantly. "FBI, they say it's urgent." Through the glass, Elizabeth watched 2 agents in dark suits enter Dean's room. They were gentle, professional, but she could see the urgency in their movements. Whatever Dean knew, it was important. She and Niels were allowed in to support him during the interview. Dean's voice was barely a whisper, and he had to rest frequently, but his mind was sharp. The details he revealed made Elizabeth's blood run cold. "The warehouse was a hub," Dean rasped. "Smuggling operation, drugs, weapons, people sometimes. Route from Canada, using back roads, private property. They had Border Patrol on payroll." "How many officers were involved?" Agent Martinez asked, recording everything. "Saw maybe 12 different ones over 2 years. Volkov was the main contact, but there were more. They talked about others." Dean closed his eyes, concentrating. "Badge numbers. I memorized badge numbers when I could see them." He recited a series of numbers. Agent Martinez's partner was already on the phone, relaying the information. "The operation?" Martinez prompted gently. "Cartel money. Mexican cartel partnered with Russian mob. Millions invested. They needed DEA intel, patrol schedules, planned raids, which routes we were watching." Dean's skeletal hand clenched. "I held out for 3 months. Then they brought Jocelyn to my cell, said they'd hurt her if I didn't cooperate." Elizabeth squeezed his other hand, feeling the bones through papery skin. I gave them outdated intel at first, stuff that wouldn't matter, but they figured it out. Tears leaked from Dean's sunken eyes. 14 months in, Jocelyn fought back, grabbed a gun from one of them during feeding, almost made it to the door. His voice broke. Niels made a sound of pure rage. They shot her in front of me. Said it was my fault. Said if I'd just cooperated. Dean couldn't continue for a moment. After that, they used Rufus. Every time I hesitated, every time I tried to give them false information, they'd hurt him. Burns, cuts, beatings. That wound on his head, that was from 2 weeks ago when I tried to refuse again. But you got him out, Agent Martinez said. Took me months to work it free. Opening was too small for me, but Rufus could squeeze through. I knew he'd find his way home. He knows every trail between here and Mom's house. How did you convince them to bring the dog to you? Told them I was dying, that I'd give them everything, safe house locations, undercover agent identities, but only if I could say goodbye to my dog first. They believed me because I looked dead already. A ghost of a smile. Volkov always underestimated how smart Rufus is. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, Dean providing every detail he could remember. License plates, voices, names mentioned in passing. The FBI agents looked grimmer with each revelation. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a massive corruption case that reached into multiple law enforcement agencies. Finally, Dr. Kumar intervened. He needs to rest. As the agents left, one turned back. Mr. Spence, we've already arrested 8 officers based on the raid. Your information will help us get the rest. You've saved a lot of lives. Dean closed his eyes. Couldn't save the one that mattered most. A knock at the door interrupted the heavy silence. Dr. Hernandez, the veterinarian, stood there with a familiar figure. I got special permission, she said softly. Someone wanted to see his dad. Rufus limped into the room, his tail wagging despite his injuries. The dog, who'd been too weak to stand properly just hours ago, had found new strength. He approached the bed carefully, as if understanding how fragile Dean was. Hey, boy, Dean whispered, his skeletal hand reaching out. Rufus gently rested his head on the bed, positioned so Dean could touch him without straining. The dog's eyes never left his master's face. Good boy, Dean breathed. Such a good boy. You did it. You got help. Both man and dog were crying. Dean's tears silent, Rufus's coming out as soft whines. The dog carefully placed one paw on the bed, maintaining contact. Agent Martinez appeared in the doorway one more time. Mrs. Spence, I thought you should know. We've found remains at the warehouse. 3 bodies so far. Your son was right about the murders, and we expect more arrests within the hour. Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak. Justice was coming, but it couldn't bring back Jocelyn or undo 2 years of torture. As the room cleared, leaving just family, Niels moved closer to his brother's bed. Dad would be proud, he said quietly. You never gave up. You survived, and you got Rufus home. Dean's eyes found his brother. I gave them information. People might have died because of what I told them. You were tortured for 2 years, Niels said firmly. You watched your wife murdered. You did what you had to do to survive. No one could blame you for that. Elizabeth thought of Jocelyn, vibrant, laughing Jocelyn who loved hiking and bad action movies and who looked at Dean like he hung the moon. Gone because of greed and corruption. The tears came again, silent and painful. I memorized everything, Dean whispered, his energy fading. Every face, every name, every detail. For her. They're going to pay for what they did to her. Rest now, Elizabeth said, stroking his forehead around the IVs and monitors. Just rest. Dr. Kumar returned. He needs to sleep. You can stay, but please let him rest. The family settled in for their vigil. Niels in an uncomfortable chair, Elizabeth in a recliner a nurse had brought for her arthritic joints. Rufus curled on a blanket on the floor, positioned where he could see Dean, refusing to leave his post. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and Dean's breathing. Elizabeth settled back, prepared for the long vigil ahead. Her son was home. Damaged, grieving, but home. They would face whatever came next together, the recovery, the trials, the long journey back from hell. For now, it was enough to sit in this sterile room and watch her son breathe. Each rise and fall of his chest a small victory, a defiance of those who'd tried to break him. He'd survived. They'd survived.